In part two of our interview, Laura asks the governor about water planning in an age of climate change. That's coming up in the second half of the show. Now, right now, we're reacting to a historic ruling that's forced the removal of a New Mexico County official. Couy Griffin has been barred from public office for his role in the January 6th insurrection, effective immediately. The ruling also disqualifies the former Otero County Commissioner and Cowboys for Trump co-founder from holding any future public office. Time to bring in our line opinion panel for the week to talk this through. We're happy to have Michael Bird, public health consultant and former president of the American Public Health Association. We also have Tom Garrity of the Garrity Group Public Relations with us. And it's always a pleasure to have Catherine McGill. She's the founder and director of the New Mexico Black Leadership Council. Thank you all for being here. Now, this ruling is the first time that any court has ruled the events of January 6, 2021 an insurrection by definition. Tom, how important is it to have that very particular thing on the record here?
Well, it's obviously, depending which side of the aisle you're on or which side of this case you're on, it's very significant. Because what it is, it's the ruling is proof of concept that the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution is meaningful and can still be used. And despite the fact that it's a state court ruling, which means it isn't binding precedent for any other court in the country, it's still a significant proof of concept kind of ruling that other states and other courts can take a look at when addressing the insurrection of January 6th.
Kathy, I mean, it's interesting, this decision, the first time since 1869, this ruling has been used. It was almost like a double take when you really think about it. But the judge clearly was not messing around here, was he?
No, not at all. And I think that I want to add to the story that I believe that, one of Griffin's arguments is that what they were doing is no different than what groups like Black Lives Matter have done. And the NAACP in Otero County and Common Cause filed a brief just saying that, it's not the same. And they were cited in a lot of the national stories that picked this up. And I think it's really important, as Tom said, that, this was about insurrection using the 14th Amendment, that they probably believe it's just going to be used to try to, go up the chain and to get more people ousted or barred under that same ruling.
Michael, the judge also wrote, you can actually find a link to what the judge wrote on a number of websites. Evidence shows Mr. Griffin normalized violence by aligning himself with other insurrectionists. He encouraged others to join the, quote, war and battle in the streets of Washington, end quote. And that's a huge part of it, isn't it? And we can't read the judge's mind, but it would seem that was a huge part of the ruling here.
Clearly. I think the point I'd like to make, that we need to really be aware of, acknowledge, and recognize is the fact that 114 police officers, Capitol Police, were injured in that insurrection.
Yep.
And 4 of them, as I understand, committed suicide. And 7 people died, as I believe the number is 7 died as a result of that insurrection. And I think that people need to be aware of the fact and own it, that words and this kind of action has consequences. And in this case, we lost police officers, and we lost people who got caught up in this insurrection. And so there are consequences for the words and the language that people use. And so people need to be very thoughtful about what they say and how they say things. And because words have consequences.
Tom, I'm so curious, what's next for Otero County? I mean, Mr. Griffin seems to have some measure of support there, of course, in his community, and, on the Board of Commissioners voted to decertify that primary election result early this year, as you recall. I'm wondering, will this ruling resonate and change minds, or is it going to build more resentment? I mean, you mentioned earlier, depending on what side of the aisle you're on, how does this go down? I mean, now that it's actually a fact now.
Yeah, there's the process aspect, which is
Right.
of course, the commissioner, the commission seat being refilled, and different reports indicate that that could happen within the next couple of days. Of course, we're taping on Thursday, but the other thing that it's really going to really look at, what is the will of the people of Otero County. And here's, that's one of the continuing narratives that I've heard in Couy Griffin's comments as a part of this particular case, is the will of the people versus the will of the law.
Right.
And if it's really the will of the people, I almost have to wonder, why is he representing himself in court as opposed to the people coming up alongside and helping? So I'm not entirely convinced that the masses that he thinks is behind him are necessarily there. They might be. They've just been silent so far.
Interesting point there, Kathy. Let me read a quote from Mr. Griffin. Quote, "Love me or hate me, I am the will of the people of Otero County, and I still had 3.5 months left in my term, but Judge Francis Matthew took away the will of the people in Otero County." Is that what happened here?
He was elected by the people of Otero County, but it doesn't mean that the people continue to support his behavior resulting from what he did on January 6th. It remains to be seen, as Tom said, whether or not the people are still alongside him. We didn't see any marching in the streets when that ruling came down. So I doubt that people were surprised that it was happening, and I'm certain it'll be appealed and all those things. But he may think more of himself than he ought.
Michael, Kathy mentioned the appeal. Mr. Griffin says he is going to appeal. But interestingly, this civil case was filed in March by a Los Alamos resident and 2 Santa Fe residents. I got to imagine Otero County, that's not going to go down too well for the people in Otero County. Does that make a difference here in your mind?
Well, it might to the folks in Otero, as you've
Yeah.
referenced, but there is the law that applies to everyone across the board. So,
Kathy, I'll give you the last word on this one too. If he says he's the will of the people down there, the will of the people did not remove him or ask for his removal. Again, does that make a difference here?
Well, I think that if the NAACP Otero County branch filed a brief, President Joseph Cotton talking about that constituency, now a large constituency in Otero County. It wasn't all of the people.
Right.
And certainly some of the people felt like, he should be removed from office, and remains to be seen if it is, quote unquote, the will of the people.
Boy, I'll tell you what, it was national news. I was listening to a back east radio station. This was the third story in at the top of the hour the other day. I mean, people, suddenly New Mexico's all over the national news again. Thanks to our line opinion panel on that one. We'll be back here at the virtual roundtable in less than 10 minutes to talk about a new survey that shows more than 2/3 of Albuquerque residents are unhappy with the city's response to homelessness. But first, we're getting some very important perspective on the issue from a group that's on the ground every day, helping unhoused people meet basic needs. Late last week, I spoke with 2 leaders of the New Mexico Harm Reduction Collaborative. Ash and Steph Charzuk tell me homelessness never begins as a choice, and that the people in this situation now need our attention.